Lambke. Amber is the founder and president of Maine Grains Incorporated. Amber, how are you today?
Great, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure, and thank you for joining us. Before I go into to peppering you with some questions, I just want to read through a quick bio so that people can get to know you like I have in the last few years. As mentioned, Amber is the founder and president of Maine Grains Incorporated. It's located in Skowhegan, Maine. Maine Grains is known for its industry-setting standards and quality, and is carried by specialty food stores and used by bakeries, breweries, and restaurants throughout the Northeast. Amber is also known as the founding director of the Maine Grain Alliance, a leader in Maine sustainable food initiative. And in addition, she also is the co-founder of the Kneading Conference, an event that attracts individuals from around the world. Before I go into the questions, Amber, when I first met you, and actually you were the first entrepreneur in my job that I had ever talked to, and we featured you right when we started the Institute. So it's so nice to have you back 4 years almost to the day later. I just found in our conversation when I met you, Amber, I got away from that time that we met, and I literally thought to myself, said, here's someone who had to create the industry and then jump forward to create a business. And I just found that so unbelievable. So from my, I guess, perspective, as well as others on the call, could you just describe the effort that you had to go through first with Maine Grains, but more importantly, sort of backing up to create the industry as a whole here in Maine? And if you could just describe that story a bit for us.
Sure. It seems daunting looking backwards at the work that's been accomplished. But as you said, the need to create infrastructure to solve how we could have locally grown grains for human consumption again in the Northeast really started with a focus on local food. And as you all know, local food and the focus on local food in farmers markets in recent years has been on the rise. And I was in a different career altogether when I started these inquiries back in 2007. But I was volunteering with my local farmers market to try to help it grow as part of Main Street's effort to revitalize the Skowhegan downtown and community. And grains were really missing from that conversation. So, efforts to eat within your region or eat within 100 miles all omitted grains for whatever reason. So I was just tuned into these issues about how do we create opportunities for farmers here, and aware that bread bakers really didn't have good solutions for where to source locally grown grains. So some of you know that my background is as a speech and language pathologist. My master's is in communication disorders. So at the time that I became involved in these initiatives in Skowhegan, I was not a stranger to problem solving. I was just problem solving different kinds of problems. And so, as you do when you're trying to solve a problem, you start asking your whys. Some of you know the 5 why strategy, but why don't we have local grains? Well, we grow grains in Maine. We're rotating with them on crop fields to manage weeds and come out of potatoes every once in a while. So why don't we have grains? Well, we don't have machines to take weeds out or to crack the hull off of an oat. And why don't we have those machines? Well, there aren't mills to house that machinery, or we've favored an economy of scale that lets the Midwestern part of the United States grow most of our grains so that it's trucked here. Well, why do we do it that way? Well, we do it that way for reasons of profitability and scale and economic policy that subsidizes and therefore reinforces large scale production, right? So you start peeling back the layers of the onion, and we realized that there were lots of challenges, but also opportunities to reviving Maine's grain economy. So that's where I plugged in to, as you said, help rebuild an industry alongside a lot of other partners in Maine and build a business in Skowhegan that would help address some of these root cause problems.
I don't even know if I've ever asked you this, but were you a baker before you got into this, or just had an interest in solving that problem?
I'm a home baker. I still am, but I would say my interest in helping solve this problem was more one rooted in community development and economic revitalization of the place that I chose to live and call home. Skowhegan embarked on a process to revitalize its Main Street in 2005. And so I was volunteering as a community volunteer, and I had chosen to move to Skowhegan by way of marriage, and we were having our kids here, and it just felt like the right thing to do to be part of the solutions that would help make this a thriving place to live. So I really come at entrepreneurship from a place of problem solving and a deep concern for community vitality. And I think as a speech pathologist, I care about language and I care about communication. And it was so clear to me moving here with a fresh set of eyes that, part of the problem that holds problems in place in communities or in industries is the story we tell ourselves about that problem or our ability or inability to fix it. And so I saw lots of opportunity here to be part of solutions. And it really, some of those solutions just plain started with changing the language with which we use to talk about our assets and what's possible.
When you started out, what was interesting to me is that correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the Kneading Conference is actually a worldwide conference. Could you just talk a little bit about what that scale and scope has become over the years?
Sure. So the Kneading Conference, KNEAD, all about bread, really was our attempt to start pulling together farmers, millers, bakers, oven builders, researchers to discuss the issue of whether or not it was possible to revive regional grain economies, not only in Maine, because we have a rich history of growing grain in Maine, but anywhere that people and communities have lost their grain industries over time. And I had just read the Brookings report from 2016 on helping the state of Maine rebuild economic opportunity. And one of the things they talked a lot about in that report was focusing on economic clusters. Now, while they weren't necessarily talking about ag in that report, they were talking about tech and marine and fisheries clusters. A grassroots group of us in Skowhegan just started thinking about grain and bread and these world-class ovens that for baking bread that are made right here in Skowhegan, and the University of Maine that was already working on studying grain growing in Maine to help the organic dairy industry have more of their inputs available right on the farm. And we looked at all of these pieces and we said, well, this is a cluster, grain swarms a cluster. And right now it's relevant for animal feed and bread, but down the road, it's going to be relevant for beer brewers and maltsters and everything in between, the printing companies in our communities that will print our labels and all of that. So we really focused from the beginning on developing a cluster, if you will, in Maine that would form connections and communicate with each other to understand how to solve root cause problems to revive Maine's grain economy. So the Kneading Conference formed in 2007 in a church parking lot here in Skowhegan with about 75 people in attendance from around the country, mostly direct connections to our efforts. But that event has grown over the years to be about 250 people annually at a 2-day conference, and we now attract presenters and attendees from around the world. The capstone event is an artisan bread fair that attracts about 3,000 people, and we're able to showcase the bakers and the equipment makers and vendors from our region that tie to our efforts. So it's been very successful, and I will say that it's helped form connections, as you said, worldwide that now lead to new opportunities for us to go to international conferences on heritage wheat, for example, and seed exchanges with other countries that share similar climate conditions to Maine. And so while this year we did not host the event in person, we have pivoted to do more virtual kinds of conferences and education. The effort carries on, and I would say our relationships worldwide are only strengthening now that virtual technologies like this are available.
My wife, the other day I mentioned your name, and I shared this story with you on a back channel, but I mentioned your name to my wife, and my wife just immediately says, "Oh yeah, Amber just got a shout out from Martha Stewart," and I just said, "Wow!" And she said, "Oh yeah, you should have known that. You should be following this stuff, Mike." What was interesting to me was How did you know in the early going that there was a market for the types of grains that either you were bringing back into Maine or that you were milling? And how did you know that it was at some point in time, right? That infrastructure had been disconnected before you
Yeah.
did all of what you were doing in the industry and certainly before the business. But how did you get an inkling that that was still there, or did you create new markets, as it were, for that high quality product?
That's a question we get asked a lot. And a lot of times, you want to start your inquiry into whether or not a business is viable by saying, well, is there a market for what I want to make? And if there is, then I'll make that thing. But I think that is faulty thinking. I have always come back to feeling like that's faulty thinking, because sometimes people don't know they want or need a product till you help them see that it's been missing. I do like the analogy of the bell curve, and that there is always low-hanging fruit for whatever your entrepreneurial idea. And those are the people that wanted that thing before you ever produced it. And as soon as you produce it, they're going to scoop it up as fast as possible. And then as your business grows, you're kind of working on the peak of the curve to get to the mainstream. And then the bell curve analogy helps me kind of compartmentalize the types of customers we might reach out to that seem completely not ready for your product. And I never think of them as a no. I think of them as a maybe somewhere further down the line, they'll be ready for this product or the price of the product or whatever. So how did we know, though? I think there were a lot of bits and pieces we were researching that spoke loudly to me. One was that we were a rich grain producing region in the mid 1800s. Somerset County, where I live, produced far more grain than we ever could have consumed as a population. We were exporting grain out of the Northeast. So we know it's possible to grow grain. We know that a lot of farmers still rotate with things like cover crops of rye and oats for soil health. But because of equipment challenges, we weren't harvesting any of that in order to save or eat the seed head. We know that Maine's potato farmers, one of the biggest industries we have in ag, rotates with oats, and the price that they could fetch for their oats over the border into Canada was barely worth harvesting them. So a lot of times those oats would get turned back over into the soil, which improves the soil, and that's wonderful. But we eat a lot of oats in the Northeast, especially in the colder weather. And so that seemed like a missed opportunity merely for the lack of machinery in the state to be able to process those things. We know that organics are one of the fastest growing industries we have right now, whether we're talking about food or products of all kinds. And in my business planning quest to learn more about how grains are produced and traded and in the world, I did end up out in Kansas to a week-long course at the International Grains Program. And there I learned that only 0.1% of the grains being grown in this country were being grown organically. So with organics being a major focus of what consumers want, and an increased attention on sourcing locally as a way to eat healthy, to reduce transportation costs and impact on the environment, and to support small businesses, 0.1% of what we grow as organic seemed ludicrous to me. And the other thing that I learned out in Kansas was that there were no resources at the International Grains Program on stone milling. So our country and our world have really turned their focus on white flour production, which we know is not healthy for us. And when you start asking your consecutive why questions, well, why are we only focused on white flour? Why is that what we're doing? Why are we focusing only on profitability and volume in the production of flour in this country? Why are we breeding for maximizing flour volume at the least possible price? There's all kinds of other values we have as eaters and bakers and cooks and chefs. We care about flavor, we care about health, we care about fiber nowadays. So for all of those reasons, we needed different products. And so it all came together for us in a business that we felt willing to create.
What was, if I could ask you just a different question, what's your distribution channel primarily of getting your product out to the market, Amber? Is it retail? Is it direct to consumer? Is it through intermediaries? Is it all of those? Or what would you say are channels you're working with?
It's really all of those. I mean, the bulk of our business is wholesale. So it's product going out the door in 50-pound bags to bakers, brewers, chefs, colleges, institutions. But we did decide to package in a retail bag in order to make sure that our brand was in front of home users of the product. Really, the retail size pack is the pack that's going to carry your story and your personality and your brand, such that those end up being advocates to the bakeries and breweries in their communities who you want to be the larger purchasers. We don't distribute ourselves. I didn't want to also be creating, I didn't want to have to understand the distribution business while trying to understand the milling business. So we rely on distributor partners. We probably have about 15 of them now that get our product from pretty much Maine to New York City and everywhere in between, corner stores, large institutional users. I felt pretty strongly out of the gates that we wanted to work with multiple distributors, that we didn't want to give any exclusive rights to any particular distributors, in part because they tend to all offer slightly different services and have different selling points in their own business, whether it's customer service or reach or product line that is diversified or more in line with a particular kind of customer, or maybe it's margin and price, or it might be minimum order size. But for all kinds of reasons, we wanted our end user to have different options. So we work with about 15 different distributors that get our products here, there, and everywhere. There are some customers that prefer direct shipping, and so we have a tiered pricing structure that goes retail, wholesale, distributor. Lately, through COVID, online sales have become a far bigger piece of our business than they ever used to be. We did have an online platform going into this pandemic, but mostly for gift giving and specialty shipments of things. And it's become an enormous part of our business right now.
Yeah, I mean, you're another company that I've called out a couple of companies here on the event, but you're another company that just really understands branding and positioning and messaging exceedingly well, Amber. And that when you look at the product just from the packaging and presentation, there's no question in your mind that this is a quality product that speaks to the elements of what you're trying to go for, relative to a clean food source and such. And that to me obviously speaks volumes of what you've done in the industry, but also in your business as well. What would be one lesson looking back that you learned in starting your company? What was something that sticks out that's so obvious that you said, wow, I wish I'd have known that before?
Oh gosh, there's so much. There's so much. It's all cumulative. I would say one lesson that I've learned, one note that I took here was just get good at saying yes as often as you can. And the caveat is that I'm not suggesting that you need to know how to balance your time and balance your set of activities and stay super focused. But there's plenty of opportunities that have come our way that might have easily scared us or felt too big or felt like not the right time. Everything from taking that trip to Kansas to saying yes when Martha Stewart's people called and said we'd like an oat expert to come to New York and be on the show, or all these things that you've never done before, but are worth doing, and you never know where those leads will go. They're worth saying yes to. So, say yes if you can to those things that scare you a little bit, because it's those places that help push you a little further. And yeah, I would say, I've already addressed root cause problem solving too, but get good also at sort of digging deep to understand the root causes of an obstacle or a no or a problem, so that you don't stop your inquiry right at the roadblock, because often these roadblocks end up as opportunities, end up as solutions you hadn't thought about that are presenting themselves so that you'll go a different direction. And so get good at digging deep.
Would you do something different, or is there any one thing that just speaks to that as to if we did it different, we might have had a better result, or at least a different result in such?
You know, I'm a real believer in the choices and the obstacles that come your way as being part of the building blocks. I will say that something that I'm getting better at as the business grows, and maybe I wish I'd had more experience or been ready to do from the outset, is just you're going to be finding mentors and locking arms with lots of different partners in your process. And I got very good and felt like I was always the one in the role of I was being interviewed for my trustworthiness, my character, my ability to work hard. And I really wished that I had a set of interview questions for investors of all kinds and partners of all kinds, because I've come to appreciate how important it is that the investors are aligned with our mission and values. And I could have learned a lot, whether it's the banker that you're proposing to use, or it's the community development institution that wants to work with you, or the private investor that comes along and thinks that you're doing good work and might want to invest. I would like to develop still for myself as we grow a set of interview questions that help me understand and make sure that investors and partners are aligned, because those strong relationships will be with you for the long haul if they go well. And if they're not going well, they can take a lot of your time.
Yeah, that's a great insight. And it's interesting. We haven't gotten to that point now, but that is one of the really scarce resources a company has, right? That sort of advisory board or the board that oversees and/or can be in an advising role to the entrepreneur. And it's funny. I've not necessarily heard it said that way, Amber. I appreciate that, because you're right. It's got to be people who see the value proposition way beyond just the entrepreneur, right? That can dig into their networks and connect you with other people as you're really growing and scaling that business. So it's not necessarily just the thing that you need right now, but it's where's that company going to be in 5 and 10 years? And those you should pick very carefully that board. And I will actually put a plug in, and actually Amber is on my board of advisory at the Institute. And it is one of those things where you cherish that people have to have the same view and interest that you do. Speak a little bit while we have you in regard to that effort in Skowhegan, because I've just really, not only did you take a couple of leaps, but you also bought a factory and outfitted it with pretty sizable industrial equipment. And that's certainly a leap. But just explain to people that haven't been up there what you guys did there at that location.
Sure. So as I mentioned, there's been, a community-wide effort to work on downtown revitalization, really led by Main Street Skowhegan, which was founded in 2005. We came along in 2007, 8, and 9 with this idea. We started the Kneading Conference in 2007. Then we had this idea that really a mill would help solve some of Maine's challenges to reviving a grain economy. I went out to the course in Kansas and came back with a fresh picture in my mind of the 5-story concrete cinder block building that was the demonstration mill on the campus. And at the time, the former Somerset County Jail building was for sale, of sturdy brick, concrete cinder block, lots of rebar building that was 4 stories tall. And so I was able to see that building in a new light and just imagine ways that we could both start our business, utilize a building that was about to go vacant when the inmates moved out. It's in the heart of our downtown, on the cornerstone of the historic district of our downtown. And it just felt like we could hit a lot of birds with one stone. The jail lot that it took 2 years to purchase the jail lot, which we were successful with in 2009, came with a very large parking lot that allowed our farmers market to join us, and also had a commercial kitchen in it. We recognized that the mill would use one piece of it, but then we'd have space in the building for other businesses to join us. And that's exactly what has happened. So we now have a knit shop that was an entrepreneurial startup, a brand new community-run radio station in our building, a Crooked Face Creamery, which is a cheesemaker that has expanded her operation and joined us in the building. I was part of helping to start a cafe in the building that would feature the grains on the menu and utilize that commercial kitchen. We now have a dry goods shop that sells the grains right on site, the Skowhegan Farmers Market, and we're continuing to grow and continuing to imagine the ways in the future that we can keep building out the possibilities around this central core theme of grains to include other value-added producers that have entrepreneurial ideas, and help be a part of leveraging our success and resources now to solve more problems in Skowhegan that we all agree are things that would improve our way of life and jobs and economic opportunities. So we just purchased the lot next door to the mill, which is vacant now, but it had a dilapidated hotel on it for a long time that was eventually torn down by the town of Skowhegan. And we've got some ambitious ideas and plans and a vision for developing that lot. So I know that for some of you, the Zingerman's Deli and the Zingerman's model from Michigan, it might be a familiar term, but we're very inspired by this idea that a central successful business might be able to have ripple effects by continuing to inspire and build out entrepreneurship around the central core. And I really see a lot of parallels in our growth and our success and the way Zingerman's has grown. So I'm inspired by that and sort of following that model to frame my vision for how we might continue to grow in Skowhegan.
I've always loved your story, Amber. As someone who actually spent much more of my career in community development and economic development before I got into what I do now, I really appreciate the efforts of people like you who have really, against so many odds, have stood up and tried to create the industry and then created the business. And now you're recreating really the town that you're in, and the location that you're at is fantastic. Interesting enough, we're going to be interviewing Amy Rowbottom from Crooked Face Creamery in a little bit here in the event. But what you guys have been able to do there and what you've created really as a cornerstone of that downtown revitalization is just fantastic. So I want to thank you for being part of our event today, Amber, providing really some insight into what it takes. I think you win the award for sort of stick-to-it-ism or stick-to-it-ism, as it were, but perseverance and persistence is definitely something that you have in spades. So I'm just always amazed by the story every time I get a chance to chat with you, and hope other people can take away the fact of you got to have some grit and you got to have some resilience to be in this business. But thank you so much for your time, Amber, and talking with you today.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you so much, Mike. Take care.
We'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.